mobile-friendly label appear next to your websites in search results. You might be wondering, what does it take to become mobile-friendly in the eyes of Google? Well, this video has you covered. So in the first half of the video, we will look at the 4 key factors that Google has identified as being central to mobile-friendly design. And in the second half of the video, we will get our hands dirty with a bit of code and we will work together on a mobile-friendly makeover. So we will take a traditional website that is not mobile-friendly at all. We will adjust a bit of code together on screen and we will make that website mobile-friendly. This should be a lot of fun. Let's get started. All right, let's review Google's big 4 mobile-friendly principles. These are taken directly from an official Google News post. So number 1, a mobile-friendly website. Avoid software that is not common on mobile devices like Flash. Number 2, a mobile-friendly website uses text that is readable without zooming. Designers have been telling us this since the dawn of time, and we should have listened. Make the text bigger. Moving along, number 3, a mobile-friendly website sizes content to the screen so that users don't have to scroll horizontally or zoom. And all that means is that we don't want to force devices to adapt to the size of our layout. Instead, we want to flip that paradigm on its head. We want to force our layout to adapt to the size of the device. So, for example, let's imagine a smartphone that is only 320 reference pixels wide. Now, if this phone visits our website, and our website is designed to be over 1,000 pixels wide, we don't want the phone to be something that it's not. We don't want it to pretend that it's a big boy, 1,000 pixels wide, and zoom out so it can fit our website. Instead, we want that phone to be true to itself. We want it to actually behave as if it's only 320 pixels wide, and it's up to us as designers to get creative and reflow our content to fit within that 320 pixel wide viewport. Now, this is very simple to do. We will learn how to write code to make this happen in the hands-on section of this video in just a moment. But first, let's move on to Google's 4th principle. So number 4, a mobile-friendly website places links far enough apart so that the correct one can be easily tapped. So I'm sure we've all been to a website on our phones, and even if we have smaller than average hands, if the links on the website are too close together, it gives us a Paul Bunyan thumb complex. It feels like our finger is too big to precisely tap what we want to tap, when in reality, the hitboxes for the links on the website are just too small. It's very simple to avoid this problem, and having said that, it's now time to move on to the mobile-friendly makeover hands-on portion of the video. Alright, so in front of you is a demo website that I purposely created to be awful. I pretended that it was the year 2006, and I built things the old-fashioned way. Because let's face it, if you already have a website that perfectly practices mobile-first design, you don't need any help earning the Google Mobile Friendly badge. So this part of the video is for anyone with a website that was designed for laptops or traditional desktop computers, and you want to make changes to make it mobile friendly. So hopefully you can extract what I'm about to do and apply it to your website. Let's get started. So we can assume that the website already looks decent on laptops and desktops, which is what we see on the left side of the screen. But we are interested in phones. So on the right side of the screen, I'm using Google Chrome to emulate a phone. And as you can see, we are in direct violation of all 4 of Google's mobile-friendly principles. So let's solve these one by one. I'm actually going to start with the 3rd principle, which was users should not need to scroll horizontally or zoom. Now, the phone that I am simulating is only 320 reference pixels wide, but our website's layout is almost 1,000 pixels wide. So we have this awkward zoom out scenario where the phone is trying to zoom out to fit the layout. So our first step is to tell the device to be true to itself. All we do is hop over to the HTML code for our page And in the head section of the HTML code, we're going to add a new line. Meta name equals viewport. Content equals, and this is the important part, width equals device width. So we're not hard coding in a numerical width value. We're just telling the device that its width should be its own device width. So it'll be true to itself. And we also want to make sure that it uses an initial scale of 1. So it's not zooming in, it's not zooming out, it's just using its own native scale. Let's close out this tag and we're in business. So I will save, and now let's refresh our phone simulation. Okay, so we solved the zoom problem. The phone is now behaving true to its native size and scale. However, our website is still almost 1,000 pixels wide, so you can see that we still have to scroll horizontally to see all of the content. So to fix this and remove that awkward horizontal scrolling, we need to make our layout flexible or squishable. And to do this, we need to write a bit of CSS code. Now, before we begin coding, let's use plain English to describe what we want to achieve with the code. So number one, we don't want to affect the layout for desktops and laptops. We only want the new CSS code that we write to be applied to smaller devices. Okay, and number two, what do we want to do for those smaller devices? We want our layout to collapse to be single column, so there won't be content here and content here. This content will simply stack and sit below this content. Okay, now that we've established a plan, let's begin coding. So I'm going to hop over to my text editor and open the CSS file for the website. And I'm going to scroll to the very bottom of the file. And the first thing I'm going to do is to create a media query. Remember, we only want our changes to affect smaller mobile devices, and we can think of a media query as an if statement for CSS. So any CSS that we include in these brackets will only be applied to the page if the condition that we are about to write in these parentheses is true. So now we can say, only include our new styles if the device that's viewing the page has a width of 960 pixels or smaller. So this will be true for smartphones and most tablets, and it will be false for most laptops and desktop monitors. So this means within these curly brackets now, we are free to make our layout squishable and flexible to remove awkward horizontal scrolling for phones, but we can keep our traditional layout intact for larger devices. So this is great. Let's get started. The first thing I will do is select the main column and the sidebar and tell them to essentially stop being columns and just take up the full horizontal space. So to do that, I will select my main column, which has a class of main area, and I will also select, comma, the sidebar. Now, in your website and in your project, you will most likely have different class names. So you need to be a detective. You need to hop over to your HTML file and see what those class names are. So in my case, I can see here's the main column. This is where I'm getting the class name, main area. And if I scroll down a bit, I can see here is the sidebar. So dig through your HTML and figure out the class names. Now back to the CSS. Once we've selected those, we want to remove their float. So I'm going to say float none. We also want to remove their width values. So width equals auto. We also want to remove horizontal margin. So margin left, 0, margin right, 0. Now, some of you might be thinking, hey, this combination of properties looks really familiar. Float, width, and margin, those are my bread and butter for creating column layouts. That's exactly right. So really all that we're doing with our new code is undoing all of these layout properties that are used at the desktop level because we don't want them to trickle down to the mobile level. Now, in addition to undoing these column layout properties for our main column and sidebar, we also want to be on the lookout for any elements that are using a specific width value. So, for example, we can see that at the desktop level, this website has a unified left margin of where I'm dragging now, and a uniform right margin of where I'm dragging now. So if I measure this overall sort of parent width of the page, you can see that it has a width of about 960. And most of these old-fashioned websites will be littered with that hard-coded width value of 960. For your website, it might be a different number. It might be 980, it might be 1200, it might be 1100. There's no way to predict. Every website is different, but I can tell you that if your website was created before the era of mobile first, some sort of specific width value is probably littered throughout your style sheet. Now, because we want our layout to be flexible and adapt to mobile devices of every size, it's easy to see why a specific width value is a huge problem. We want our layout to be width agnostic. So all of that is a long-winded way of saying that there are many other elements that we want to tack on to receive these properties. So we want to comb through our CSS file, and whenever we see a specific width value, I'm going to add that class name to this rule. So for example, let's go up to the top of our style sheet and let's search for, I'm going to use Command F on PC, that would be Control F. Let's search for the word width. Okay, so I see that there is an element on my website with a class of site header inner. So I can just copy this class name, scroll back down to the bottom, this rule where we are removing these properties, comma, add that class name. Let's search again to find the next instance of width. So I see that there is an element that has a class of site content, so I will copy this, go down to the bottom, add that to the rule. All right, now I know that right now many of you are raising your hands and saying, excuse me, my website has about 10 quadrillion instances of the word width. Do you really expect me to copy and paste all of those class names into this new rule? No, I don't, because many of them are harmless. So, for example, you might have styles for icons or buttons or other small UI elements that only have width values of 16 pixels or 40 pixels. You get the idea. And these are not going to cause horizontal scrolling on mobile devices. So what we are really searching for are relatively large pixel width values that are used to create columns or containers. If we keep that distinction in mind, it really limits the number of elements or classes that we need to add to our rule. And I would say that for most websites, it shouldn't take you more than a few minutes to build out this list. Okay, behind the scenes, I just added 2 more classes to this rule. Now I'm going to save and refresh the phone simulation. We've made some real progress. So if we scroll down a bit, this gray area used to be the sidebar, but now it's successfully stacking underneath the other content. So we've established a single column layout. But our work is not complete yet because you can see that we can still scroll to the right quite a bit. And this is caused by this large image of the bee. So let's look at the desktop version very quick. We see that we have sort of this full width photograph, this large image. Now, large images like this can create horizontal scrolling for smartphones if we don't take care of them with our CSS. So to fix this, all we need to do, and we can even include this outside of our media query. We typically don't mind if this gets passed on to laptops and desktops. We just want to select all images on the page, and we want to give them a max width of 100% and set their height to auto. So if I refresh the desktop version, nothing changes. But if I refresh the phone simulation, the image now fits the device. And if I try to scroll horizontally, I can scroll a little bit, so it's not perfect, but we're almost there. So if I scroll up, let's figure out what the culprit is. What is forcing this horizontal scroll? So we can see that it's an embedded video. Now, I could show you how to use CSS to make this embedded video fit the device, but I feel like that would be missing the point. Now, even though most modern embedded video players use HTML5 video instead of Adobe Flash, I've noticed that when I perform Google searches for my pages, any page that uses an embedded video is not considered mobile friendly, whereas all of my other pages are. So even though the embedded video technically is not Flash, I'm still going to remove it from the page because it doesn't feel very mobile friendly. Now, instead of removing the video outright, I will replace it. So here it is, it's in this iframe. I will replace the embedded video with a simple link to the video. So let's save, let's refresh the phone simulation. Now we can see that if I try to scroll horizontally, I can't. Now, some of you may be screaming, whoa, 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 I don't want to give up embedded videos on desktop and laptop as well. Isn't there some sort of way we can include those videos for larger devices and include just a plain link on mobile devices? Yes, absolutely we can do that, but we won't be doing that in this video as it's a tiny bit more involved. But if that's something that interests you, perform a web search for conditional loading with JavaScript. In particular, check out the solution named response.js, which is available on GitHub. Also, the Zurb Foundation framework has a great feature named Interchange, which would handle that situation very nicely. But let's not get too sidetracked. So let's look back to our website on the phone simulator. So we no longer need to zoom in. We no longer need to scroll horizontally. Next, let's focus on optimizing the font size. So even though users don't need to scroll horizontally any longer to view the layout, if the font sizes are too small, they still might want to zoom in just to be able to read the fonts, which is a huge no-no in terms of being mobile friendly. So let's hop over to our CSS and see what we can do. Now, most websites will define a baseline font size on the HTML or body element towards the top of your style sheet. Now, let's assume that we don't want to change the desktop layout in any way. So even though the font size, in my opinion, is way too small even for desktops, maybe corporate told us to leave it alone and our hands are tied. So let's pretend that we only want to increase the font size for smaller devices. We can just jump down to our media query. Let's create a new rule where we are targeting the HTML element. And we saw that up above it was using a baseline size of 11 pixels. Let's bump this up to 15 pixels and refresh the phone simulator. And we see good news and bad news. The good news is that most of the text is bigger and now easier to read, but this main body text, where I'm moving the cursor, we can see that it stayed the same and it's still difficult to read. This is a common problem for a lot of older desktop-oriented websites, so if you run into this, don't get discouraged. What you can do is simply right-click on the text that is still too small and click Inspect Element. This will open your DevTools. We can see that this paragraph is selected, and on the right side of this window, we see all of the rules that are being applied to that element. Now, this first rule looks like the culprit to me, and to confirm that, I can just uncheck this property of font size, 11 pixels. And as soon as I uncheck that, the problem goes away. So we see that on the right side now, the font looks great. As soon as we check this again, it's terrible and impossible to read. So this is the problem child. This font size 11 pixels for main area paragraphs is the problem. This is a font size strategy that a lot of older websites use. Typically, we only want to use percentage-based values to control the font size of sections. Older websites typically used pixels. So to fix this, we want to head over to our media query. Let's create a new rule, main area P. We want to match that problem child selector that we saw. And we just want it to use a size that is relative to this baseline that we set. So we can simply say font size should be 100%. In other words, use the baseline size. So save and refresh. We are in business. Excellent. So users don't need to zoom in to read the text. They don't need to scroll horizontally to view the content. We aren't using technologies like Flash. So currently, the only Google mobile-friendly principle that we are violating is what I call the Paul Bunyan thumb complex. So currently, if a user came to this website on their phone, and let's say they wanted to tap Portfolio, good luck. These links are so close together that most people would accidentally hit frequently asked questions or news when they really meant to hit Portfolio. To remedy this, let's adjust the navigation so that each link sits on its own line, and then we will also give each one a bit of vertical padding. So in our HTML, we can see that those navigation links sit in the nav element inside the site header. So if we want each link to sit on its own line, we need to tell these list items to stop being floated to the left. Now, luckily for us, we already have a rule within our media query for smaller devices that removes floats and margins. So let's just tack on another selector to this rule. Within the site header element, look inside the nav and then grab any list item elements. So that alone will put each link on its own line. Now we just need to create a bit of vertical padding so that, again, our thumb doesn't accidentally hit the wrong one. So let's create a new rule. Site, header, nav. We want to target the actual link elements themselves. So A. We want the links to be block level, so display block. Let's add vertical padding, so padding. We can use shorthand. So if we provide two values, the first is used for vertical padding, 20 pixels, and we don't want any horizontal padding, so I'll say 0. So refresh. Great, so now our thumb should have no problem tapping the correct link. Let's also add a border to make the distinction between links even clearer. Border bottom, let's go with 1 pixel solid. I'll choose a slightly darker gray. Excellent, but the navigation is now using a lot of valuable screen real estate, which is why many mobile websites will hide the navigation by default and only display it once you tap some sort of menu icon. Now, we won't implement that functionality in this video, but the good news is that I already have a video showing you how to do this. So I will include a link to that. But for now, it's time to pat ourselves on the back because our website is now in line with Google's Big 4 mobile-friendly principles, which means if you apply what we've learned today to your website, you should have no trouble earning Google's mobile-friendly label. Now, before we close out this video, I do want to make one final edit to our website so that all of you designers out there can sleep tonight. So what we need is a bit of horizontal padding or white space along the left and right margins of our content. Now, I'm not going to add this to the overall body element because we want our top header to have a gray background and we want it to be flush against the borders of the device. And the same thing with our footer, it has a gray background. So instead of adding horizontal padding to the body, let's add a bit of horizontal padding to the header, the main content area, and the footer. So in our CSS, let's create a new rule. Site, header, inner. Now these classes will obviously be different for your website, but I think you can extract the principle here. Site content and site footer inner. Padding left, let's go with 15 pixels. Padding right, 15 pixels. Much better. So I think we can sleep at night now. The text is not directly up against the edge of the screen, and all is right in the world. Really quickly, here's a public service announcement. Please do not use this video as a guideline if you are building a brand new website from the ground up. This video is designed for people who are maintaining older websites and you want to retrofit them to be mobile friendly. If you are building a new site from the ground up, obviously Google's Big 4 mobile friendly principles still apply, but you can save yourself a lot of trouble by simply following a design pattern named mobile first. So if you're building brand new websites from the ground up, give yourself some homework, research mobile first. You will be a better designer and developer for it. That's where I will end this video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you feel like you learned something. And stay tuned for more web development videos. Thanks. Bye. Quick shameless plug. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see others like it, in addition to my YouTube channel, I also have premium video courses on web design. In the description